So it seems the City of Tshwane has less than 5 days to pay workers their 5.4% salary increase. Let's remind you how we got here. It was last week the South African Local Government Bargaining Council ordered the cash-strapped city to pay workers. Those affiliated with SAMWU, it's the South African Municipal Workers Union, embarking on a strike demanding these salary increases. So where are we on this? Let's get an update. Tshwane Mayor Cilliers Brink joining me this morning. Mayor, good morning to you. I appreciate the time. Is that what's happening? It's 5 days and then you've got to fork out the money? Is that the latest?
No, it's not quite as simple as that. We have informed the Bargaining Council some weeks ago that we would be applying for exemption from the salary increases, and we cannot lodge that application before our financial statements for the previous financial year haven't been completed. So the order to pay is perfunctory, but it's not conclusive. We have a council resolution and a funding plan, as I've explained before, that says we cannot afford these increases, and applying for exemption is part of our financial recovery. So we will be continuing with the exemption application. And we hope that all members of trade unions will give that process an opportunity to be completed. Unfortunately, we've seen violent, sporadic, unprotected strikes. We've seen attacks on service infrastructure, including clinics, clearly unlawful conduct, desperate conduct, which we condemn in the strongest terms, and which we'll be acting on with quite some resolve.
There is some criticism as well that the City of Tshwane is using money elsewhere for other infrastructure projects, as probably quite rightly, things like water, sanitation, electricity, trying to get on top of that and not paying workers. Is there no wiggle room? It's one of the criticisms leveled at your city.
So we went through a budget process. The reality is that we have an unfunded budget, but with a funding plan. In other words, a set of measures that the Municipal Council has agreed on to get to a position where our budget is funded. But no, the simple answer is there is no wiggle room. In the past, salary increases were granted in one instance outside of collective bargaining. Those benefits have accrued to employees of the city. Unfortunately, it's had a devastating effect on the finances of the city. So we don't want to make these decisions. Nobody wants to not pay increases. We know that our workforce is essential to service delivery. We know that their morale is very important. But at the same time, as I've said before, if we do pay these increases today, in 2 or 3 months' time, we won't be able to make payroll. And that is a position that Tshwane does not want to be in. It's a position that many municipalities across the country are in, and we would like to avoid it. So take the pain now and avoid even greater pain and potential job losses in future.
Let's talk numbers for a second, Mayor, if we could. If the increase were to be granted, if you were not given as a city the exemption, what kind of hit would the city budget take? Give me the big numbers here so we can just add some context.
So it's essentially 600 million. And as we speak, the city's budget is already in an unfunded position in the region of 3 billion. So it will have a devastating effect. But the case on the merits, which of course will be decided at the Bargaining Council and potentially the Labour Court, is whether the city is in a financial position to pay these increases. I don't see how any rational decision maker can come to that conclusion. There are no other numbers. The only consideration there could be is if there is a sudden and drastic improvement in the city's financial position. Of course, we're working very hard to achieve this, but we won't be able to achieve it in order to pay these increases, exactly because in looking at the reasonable financial position of the city, there just simply isn't the resources.
Let's talk the timelines about when it might be possible, Mayor. As you're saying, take the pain now, which I think has a very different effect for someone who's earning minimum wage. But that aside, take the pain now and sort this out later. What does later mean? If taking the pain now, how long does that pain last? What's the expected timeline? 3 months, next financial year? And when you get to that point, there could be demands for even more money, Mayor, because of no increases now. It just has a knock-on effect, doesn't it?
So we'll have to wait until the next budget cycle, either mid-year, when we've got the opportunity to adjust the budget. If we're going to do that, then we'll have to see significant increase in revenue collection in the financial position of the city within the next 3 to 4 months. And if not that, in the next budget cycle, which is June next year. Of course, it has a knock-on effect, but also, as I've mentioned, in 2019, there was a significant benefit that accrued to Tshwane employees that didn't happen in the rest of the country. That was a mistake. That was mismanagement of our finances. But nonetheless, that is a benefit that accrued and has to be taken into account. So we are on a rescue mission in the capital city. A number of measures will have to be taken to prevent this city from running out of cash, from services deteriorating, and to put us on a road to recovery. It is in the best interest of all the members of our community, whether residents or employees of the city, politicians or managers or anyone who has an interest in the future of the capital city, that we carry out that plan, even if it means difficult decisions along the way, because making those decisions now prevent even more difficult decisions and circumstances in the future.
Mayor, let me ask you this in closing. As we've seen, there's been violent protests around this very issue already. If the exemption is granted, the workers do not get their increases, even for all the reasons you've explained. How do you handle what could be a potentially very violent situation? Just in closing.
So we have to distinguish protected action from lawlessness and criminality. And anyone who shuts down services, closes clinics where the poor and the vulnerable depend on their treatment, will be acted against. The city manager has issued a number of ultimatums for the sake of greater caution. And as from today, disciplinary actions, including summary dismissals, will follow. So there has to be consequences, and we'll work with law enforcement and well-organized local communities, including private security companies, to deal with the criminality. But I do have to emphasize that protected, legitimate labor action and criminality cannot be treated in the same way.
All right, so we wait to see what happens with these next 5 days. It looks like it might not necessarily be the case. Tshwane Executive Mayor Cilliers Brink, thank you very much indeed for your time in joining us this morning. It's a timeline that the workers of SAMWU and other city officials and city staff are watching very closely. As we heard from the Mayor, 600 million rand out of the budget if it were to be paid over, but they are working on an exemption at the moment. We'll keep a very close eye on that story.